was in St Mary's Roman Catholic Church Hall in the Carlton in Glasgow. The Celtic Football Club was formally constituted by Brother Walfrid on the 6th of November 1887. The main objective of founding Celtic was to supply the East End conferences of the St Vincent de Paul Society with funds for the maintenance of the dinner tables of our needy children in the missions of St Mary's, Sacred Heart and St Michael's. The hall that became the birthplace of Celtic has since been demolished, but the church still stands and was the venue for the funerals of Celtic legends Tommy Burns, Bertie Auld and Stevie Chalmers. Celtic also celebrated their 125th year with an anniversary mass at St Mary's, which is now the venue of what has become an annual celebration. And in 2021, Glasgow's Angortamor Memorial Statue was unveiled outside St Mary's.
Anyone who visits St Mary's will realise the words grand and large are very much what springs to mind. The sheer capacity of the church signifies the large number of Irish people that settled here. The first parish priest of St Mary's was actually from the north of Scotland, Father Forbes, but he went to Ireland to raise money to build a church for the Irish, and he was away a year, and after a year of fundraising in Ireland he came back with enough money to build St Mary's, not only build it but to have it consecrated the day it was open. And you can't consecrate a church until it's bought and paid for. So that shows you that even the Irish who remained in the homeland were very much keen that the Irish who came here were cared for. And what's important in St Mary's is that not many people know this, but we have two of the very first post-Reformation bishops buried in the crypt here, and we have 14 priests who in that sense had died of cholera and typhoid, caring for the sick and the poor. So the Irish who came here under the circumstances of the Angortamor, the Great Hunger, and some people passionately get upset when you use the word Irish famine. There was no there was the blight, but it was through political and neglect of the state that these people were forced to go into what was rightly referred to earlier as coffin ships. And then indeed, when the Irish got here, they were not made welcome. We have here commemorating the Irish famine this piece of work from Peter Howson, and I think, like the Irish Famine Memorial outside, it's a thing of beauty, but captures the anguish and the horror as well, and it conveys and serves here. It's on loan to St Mary's, but it represents, I suppose, from round about that crowd of despair and misery, I think a beacon of hope, which Brother Walfrid, who was serving here in the parish as the depute head at the time, had decided that we needed to respond to the needs of these starving wains. And I suppose the meals for children, to help out the children of this parish and of Sacred Heart and St Michael's, I suppose the notion to provide food for the children was to begin with the most vulnerable and the most needy. And Brother Walfrid, I suppose he's iconic to the response of the Catholic community here to feed the poor, to feed the neglected. But there would have been lots of others who were there. But Walfrid, and I think fittingly, is the figurehead of a movement of a community to respond to those in need. And I would like to see that responding to those in need is still at the core of what Celtic stands for. Our issues off the pitch are as important as our issues on the pitch, and there are words like no other club and things like that, and we talk about the Celtic way and state of mind, and I think these are very, very important. That I think a lot of people who are so passionate about Celtic wouldn't be so passionate if we didn't take the cause of our neighbour to heart. There have been, I suppose, many iconic moments, I would call iconic, where Celtic and its place of birth have reconnected. And one of them was the 125 Mass that was celebrated, and indeed the 125 victory the next day against Barcelona. And that celebration made me decide to change the normal response I give to a question when people say, is there a plaque to commemorate the founding of Celtic? I suppose we didn't do it in half measures, and we decided to have commissioned a mosaic as you come in the door. I suppose doorways can be symbolic of beginnings and entry, and this doorway is the beginning of the Celtic story. So we commissioned this mosaic here, and the inscription round the side in a sort of Celtic script says, "To the greater glory of God and in honour of our Blessed Mother," commemorating the founding of the Celtic Football Club in this parish church of St Mary's, Calton. I suppose that just says what's on the tin. But if you look a bit deeper, there's two things of significance. We had the mosaic commissioned in Palestine. I've visited Palestine and have personally an affinity and a support for the cause of the people of Palestine, and was impressed by the craftsmen there who labour in the mosaic industry. So it was important that they be used and got the piece commissioned in Palestine. But what's more symbolic to me is all the stones in this mosaic come from the Holy Land. If we look at the kind of red stone, that's typical of Bethlehem, the place of our Lord's birth. The yellow or a beige stone is from Jerusalem, the place of our Lord's death. And the black stone is from Cana, where Jesus probably performed my favourite miracle of all, turning the water into wine. But the iconography of the mosaic itself is very important. We can see in each corner there's a set of hands, and one's very simple. It's a priest's hands. There's two hands offering the bread and wine, which is one cornerstone of the club. It was founded by people of faith to address charitable needs. But if you look at the other corner, it's actually two different sets of hands. It symbolises the hands of sharing, hands of friendship, hands of help and outreach. And if you look just beyond the bread, there's the old 1D, the symbol of the penny. That's the penny meals which Celtic was founded for. So we have, I suppose, the cornerstones in my consideration of the faith and the origins of the club is both, isn't it? It's faith, family, football, and then the Celtic cross. Most of us will remember when that was restored to the jerseys for 1988, the centenary year, and how the Celtic played with the cross, and then at the heart the clover, and 1888. I'm very proud of this mosaic, and I think it rightly serves as a visual aid to remember people what is an important part, albeit a foundational part of the club's history. I've been here been St Mary's for 19 years now. Born and brought up, I say the Far East, from Carmyle, but I've always been aware of tensions that surround parades or marches. When I first came to St Mary's in 2002, the first summers there, I was with the late Monsignor Smith, God rest him, and we were really surprised the first time a march passed St Mary's, because essentially what happened was the march stopped outside the church, and abuse was hurled. And indeed, the doorstep and the doors, the windows were festooned with spittle. And Monsignor Smith took a brave campaign with the Strathclyde Police at the time. He was Chief Constable Orr, and there was a review, and there was a revision into what would happen in marches. However, I suppose my experience and my certain degree of passiveness changed in 2018. We are celebrating in my other church at the other end of the Calton. As the vigil mass was coming out, an orange march was passing by, and at that point the church is a bit of a bottleneck. and Catholics are very good at getting out of chapel, so there was no way I was getting back in to the church because of the crowds there. And at that point I became aware that I was being spat upon, and indeed at that point someone who was accompanying the march, so to speak, had one of these batons they use and was attempting to strike me with it. But eventually the march was sort of moved on, and at that point I'd been conscious that I'd been spat upon. In fact, at one point I was spat in my eye, and I think you just become a wee bit embarrassed, and I think sometimes the priests, you like to just be strong, and I didn't make much of a fuss about it, but it was reported to the police, and the police came that night and asked to have an account of what happened. And so I just explained to them, and indeed I wasn't the only one that was being abused at and shouted at that night. There was many parishioners were scurrying away, but it transpired that eventually someone was convicted for spitting on me, but I was led to believe there was about 24 different samples of DNA on my vestments, but only one reached a certain bar of being able to prosecute or was identifiable. The great defence is that these people are not part of the Orange Order. They're stragglers on. The actual man who was convicted plays in their bands. He just didn't seem happened to be in uniform that night, and it's sad. And what frightens me more, and what sticks in my memory most about that night, was actually there was a child who was a little more than a toddler that was laughing and being encouraged to shout as well. And it makes you think, in 20 years since I first came here, nothing's really changed, and is it going to change? It needs to be addressed, but as long as we're using words like parade and not identifying what these marches are truly about, and it's about the suppression of a population, it's about suppression of a people, it's about hatred of people's religion and their identity, and it's primarily focused towards Irish Catholics, and slogans of "We are the people." It sums it all up. You might recall it was not long after wee Bertie's funeral took place here that we first met, and it was in anticipation of your fundraising campaign, and when I understood that St Mary's would be a beneficiary of that, I was delighted on several fronts. I think one of the motivating factors for yourself engaging with me was that you had to come to realise that St Mary's gets no external help or assistance, and is very much dependent on the generosity of the folk in the Calton and those who attend. And almost 2 years into the pandemic, the parish was in let's just say courting a disastrous situation. The money raised has been truly transformative. It certainly is giving us a safety net. It does mitigate against the costs. So everyone is experiencing rising just now, but it certainly helped us fund the fabric of this place. It's taken us from, to be honest, debt back into the black, which is fantastic. But it also gives us scope to continue to try and do good work in the area for folk. The poverty that existed in this area when Brother Walfrid and Celtic were founded does exist. It's got a slightly different face. It finds its face in drug abuse, prostitution, neglect, isolation, and there are good parishioners here who associate with the parish and endeavour to do good work. We even host it's asylum seekers who were unaccompanied, whose parents have died and have found themselves in this country, and that's work that goes on in the background discreetly, and I'm delighted at that. I would probably also share with you personally what the outreach from Celtic State of Mind made for me. I probably was in a fairly dark place. The only real time I'd been getting out during the pandemic was to celebrate yet another funeral. I think over 160 COVID funerals and 200 more funerals, including the loss of my own father. And the outreach from Celtic State of Mind that came from nowhere really lifted my spirits, because in big masses like, say, Bertie's funeral, 125 Mass and all those things, and this church is a great theatre almost for these great events. But when the show moves out of town, you can be very much on your own, and to think that the supporters of Celtic State of Mind took a pause, stopped to think, and made that outreach means a tremendous amount to me personally, just on a very human level, because I don't worry about finance, because I always say it's God's house, He needs to look after it, but at times you do get worried, and then at times you have hopes and aspirations. I'd love to build a new hall that to commemorate where Brother Walfred started, and the community get together, and those dreams and aspirations were all but dead in the water, and the fantastic response with Celtic State of Mind has been transformative, and I would like to just convey that to all those who are listening to the podcast from my heart. A profound thank you.
In December 2021, a Celtic State of Mind hosted a charity weekender and invited other Celtic podcasts to get involved. They came in their numbers and included Endless Celts, Celtic Down Under, the Celtic The Thunder, Celtic Shared, Celtic Supporters Podcast, 67 Hail Hail, The Unrestricted View, The Patriot Game, I'm Frank and He's Tommy, The Huddle Breakdown, The Celtic Exchange, Electronic Tims, Glasgow is Green, and 4 Tims in a Pod. We also had special guests Tony Curran and Jeremy Cabe, and the total raised was almost £29,000. We'd love to extend a huge thank you to everyone who got involved and everyone who donated. The whole ethos of Celtic Football Club is based on community and charity, and it was a stark reminder in these dark times that when the Celtic fans pull together, we certainly are a fan base like no other.